How to stave off cynicism. Implicit bias training to maintain cognitive control. First, we will define cynicism. We will discuss how cynicism may fuel prejudice. And lastly, what can we do to stave off cynicism? What is cynicism? Cynicism. Number 1. An inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest, skepticism. Public cynicism about politics. Synonyms: skepticism, doubt, distrust, mistrust, suspicion, disbelief. Number 2. A school of ancient Greek philosophers, the Cynics. A person who believes that people are motivated purely by self-interest rather than acting for honorable or unselfish reasons. A member of a school of ancient Greek philosophers founded by Antisthenes, marked by an ostentatious contempt for ease and pleasure. The movement flourished in the 3rd century BC and revived in the 1st century AD. The deleterious effects of stereotyping on individual and group outcomes have prompted a search for solutions. One approach has been to increase awareness of the prevalence of stereotyping in the hope of motivating individuals to resist natural inclinations. However, it could be that this strategy creates a norm for stereotyping, which paradoxically undermines desired effects. The present research demonstrates that individuals who received a high prevalence of stereotyping are often more likely to hold prejudiced thoughts and behaviors. People express lesser stereotypes when they have received a low prevalence of stereotyping messages or no message at all. Furthermore, working professionals who received a high prevalence of stereotyping messages were less willing to work with an individual who violated stereotypical norms. Those who received no message, a low prevalence of stereotyping message, or a high prevalence of counter-stereotyping effort message. Recommendations from the American Psychological Association. The APA recommends that the following policies be adopted at both the state and federal level to reduce the risks of violence and escalation of aggression. Aggression can emerge from the militarization of law enforcement, enhance law enforcement and community relations, and improve public safety. It is encouraged that the development of community-driven responses that empower communities with limited resources to advocate for the resources they need, including improved policing and more accountability, for example, citizen representation on review boards. Implement community-based policing nationwide and train law enforcement personnel on how stereotypes, including implicit bias, affect their and others' perceptions and decisions. Require such education and community-based policies, procedural justice and bias-free policing training for law enforcement departments that receive surplus military equipment. Provide additional funding to Department of Justice initiatives such as COPS and CRS. Collect data at the federal level on all police shootings and on the racial/ethnic makeup of citizens involved in incidents such as stop and frisk. We all have implicit bias, so how to make sure that those bias don't impact co-workers or the community in negative way? Here are a few best practices. Build a diversity strategic plan upon its core values. 1. Allophilia, respect for the dignity of the individual. 2. Personal and professional lines, integrity. 3. Build, maintain, earn, trust. 4. Demonstrate values, call others on their stuff, transparency about not be transparent, credibility. 5. Continuous improvement, accountability to community, and 6. Personal renewal, accountability to personal development. Develop a community partnership diversity plan. The components of a diversity plan might include: 1. Developing ongoing communication systems to create and reinforce the workplace diversity commitment to all employees with an emphasis on why it is important and what it means to the organization. 2. Establishing departmental action plans to ensure the workforce reflects the diversity of the community, and 3. Developing organization-wide assessment and evaluation systems to monitor diversity progress throughout the organization. Additionally, training and empowerment initiatives provide a foundation, for all levels of the organization, to foster the accomplishment of diversity goals. Conduct a study to develop a diversity management policy. The work can be segmented into 3 phases. Phase 1. 1. Framework, diversity definition, policy and vision statement, best practices benchmarking of other organizations, and potential application to the organization, and the rationale for seeking a consultant's assistance. Phase 2. 2. Strategic plan, a plan of action for incorporating diversity management, a plan for conducting cultural audit, training plan, measures of effectiveness, accountability methods and rewards and recognition system analysis, and Phase 3. 3. Implementation, assessment of strengths and barriers in the culture, and a marketing strategy for deploying diversity management. Designed a strategic plan to provide a link between the vision for diversity management and the actions required for success. The goals are to 1. Create a positive environment, incorporate diversity management training into all leadership training programs. Goal 2. Conduct a cultural audit and develop intervention strategies. Goal 3. Establish guidelines to define and address social climate issues affecting personnel. Goal 4. Value all people, action plans to target underrepresentation, and implement accountability measures into evaluations, and Goal 5. Promote individuals' ability to reach their full potential, identify and groom high-performing individuals in underrepresented groups for upper-level positions, and make mentor programs accessible to all. Stave off cynicism, implicit bias, and training to maintain cognitive control accountability. A key element to ensuring the success of any organizational initiative, especially diversity initiatives, is accountability. Accountability is achieved by making the appropriate leaders responsible for diversity by linking performance evaluation elements and compensation to the successful implementation and progress of these initiatives. Accountability helps to ensure that everyone is on board and actively engaged in the diversity process. Make use of consequence management. The program philosophy maintains that poor diversity management adversely affects a manager's ability to manage. Promotion to the next level requires competent or role model assessment. One component for evaluating management performance is the ability to manage a diverse group of employees. Established a top-level diversity steering and assessment team to guide and oversee diversity plans and programs, and to ensure the level of accountability necessary in order to achieve desired results. Members include the President, Chief Financial Officer, Senior Vice President of Human Resources, and other corporate officers. They meet monthly to discuss diversity progress and challenges. The team receives counsel from the Diversity Action and Advisory Group, comprised of 8 employee affinity groups. At one partner organization, recurring diversity training is mandatory for all employees, and business unit managers are held accountable for timely attendance by both management and non-management employees. Accountability. To ensure managerial accountability, the company reduces the operating budget of a business unit by $1,000 for each manager and $500 for each employee who fails to attend scheduled training without giving 48 hours advance notice of cancellation. Last-minute no-shows are accordingly discouraged, and management is induced to treat diversity training with the same seriousness as any other business activity. A director stated, "If you grab them by their wallet, their hearts and minds will follow." Stave off cynicism, implicit bias, and training to maintain cognitive control, creating a framework. Great examples of a new policing is the way Columbia Heights is really engaged with the community. Crime is down, fear is up. This was the Bill Clinton's strategies for the advancement of his political agenda. We cannot ignore that things out of place draw our attentions. However, we have to be mindful that these things can distract us from being vigilant actions of the larger group. Stave off cynicism, implicit bias, and training to maintain cognitive control as a policing intervention we will support. 1. A 3-year plan to building trust and legitimacy in the community that officers operate. 2. Community policy and oversight panels, Communique advisory councils, and internal affairs guidance. 3. Communication, transparency, and community input in technology and social media tools. 4. Regularly scheduled community policing and crime reduction, listening sessions and briefings. 5. Training and education, officer self-care plans, officer implicit bias sessions, officers as implicit bias go-to trainers in. 6. Officer wellness and safety, annual review of officer self-care plans, personal development and advancement of the human behind the badge. President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. The task force subsequently made recommendations under each of the above pillars and produced a 100-page document, Final Report of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. 1. Review and update policies, training, and data collection on use of force, and engage community members and police labor unions in the process. 2. Increase transparency of data, policies, and procedures. 3. Call on the Post Commission to implement all levels of training. 4. Examine hiring practices and ways to involve the community in recruiting. 5. Ensure officers have access to the tools they need to keep them safe. Avoid becoming a scapegoat. https Law enforcement is currently under a great deal of pressure to get it right, and there are countless examples of police leaders who have been sent packing as communities become increasingly intolerant of perceived missteps. Some of those chiefs needed to go, but many others were simply the victim of timing and became the political scapegoat for an elected official, fearful of growing dissatisfaction among his or her constituency. The great thing about the policing profession is that we are capable of sharing our lessons learned and building on successes because we are not in competition with each other. In fact, when one agency hits a home run, it's good for all of us. www.policeone.com/training/articles. These challenges, which manifest themselves at every stage of the recruitment, selection, and retention processes, are daunting. But, as the experiences of the law enforcement agencies highlighted in this report make clear, they are far from insurmountable. In fact, agencies that have undertaken this effort have found that increased diversity brings a range of benefits that can be seen both within their workforces as well as in their relations with the communities they serve. Idas the Hopathothas reports discussion of barriers that inhibit diversity and the promising practice est have been adopted and are being used in jurisdictions all across HEC, particular light hosathot manothaba the internal resources to undertake this type of review themselves. At the same time, the work done for the Advancing Diversity in Law Enforcement initiative has revealed a number of unanswered questions and areas for future research and review. Specifically, more work needs to be done to understand the impact of increased workforce diversity on the enforcement activities of law enforcement agencies. Additional empirical research is needed to better understand the long-term impacts of the promising practices highlighted in this report. Further research could analyze how to further institutionalize these promising practices within departments so that they can withstand changes in leadership and personnel. When government stakeholders and policymakers consider laws and regulations that impact selection procedures and criteria for law enforcement agencies, the impacts on the agency's ability to hire officers that reflect the diversity of their communities should be taken into account. Further research is needed to better understand how law enforcement agencies can successfully retain and foster career advancement of officers from underrepresented populations. http://docs/rbp-principled.pdf. Key decision points at which racial bias can occur can take a number of forms. The focus is usually on enforcement decisions officers make at the incident level, namely, on decisions to watch, stop, search, and arrest suspects. But it is equally, or even more, crucial for education and training programs to explore racial bias at the strategic or policy level. Enforcement decisions at the incident level. At the incident level, racial bias can play a part at several key decision points for police officers, including education and training. Deciding who is worth surveilling for criminal activity, who is worth paying close attention to, including which vehicle tags to run. Deciding whom to contact or detain to investigate suspicions. Deciding what attitude to adopt during contacts and stops, for example, firm, friendly, confrontational. Deciding what actions to make suspects take during stops, for example, getting out of vehicles, emptying pockets, keeping hands in sight, assuming a prone position. Deciding whether and how to explain to citizens the reasons for contacts or stops. Deciding how long a stop will last, for example, how long to wait for records checks or canine units for searches. Enforcement decisions at the incident level. At the incident level, racial bias can play a part at several key decision points for police officers, including education and training. Deciding whether to search, or request consent to search, people and vehicles, and how extensive and intrusive the search will be. Deciding how dangerous suspects are, and what level of force, if any, is necessary to control them. Deciding what enforcement action to take, for example, no action, verbal warning, citation or summons, custodial arrest, and deciding what charges to file, for example, statutes versus ordinances, single versus multiple charges, felonies versus misdemeanors. Recommendations 3. Education and training programs relating to racial bias in policing should present alternative operational strategies, in particular, community and problem-oriented policing strategies. Recommendation 4. Education and training programs relating to racial bias in policing should identify the key decision points at which racial bias can take effect, at the incident level. Recommendation 5. Education and training programs relating to racial bias in policing should explore the reasons it exists, especially at the institutional, organizational, and social levels. Training to maintain cognitive control. Most officer-involved shootings occur under some type of stress, arousal, or threat of harm. In other words, real life is different from laboratory life. Stress arousal can rob an officer of cognitive control. Training to maintain cognitive control. Philosophers who have written about implicit bias have claimed or implied that individuals are not responsible, and therefore not blameworthy, for their implicit biases, and that this is a function of the nature of implicit bias as implicit. Below the radar of conscious reflection, out of the control of the deliberating agent, and not rationally revisable in the way many of our reflective beliefs are. I argue that close attention to the findings of empirical psychology, and to the conditions for blameworthiness, does not support these claims. Jules Holroyd, Journal of Social Philosophy. Training to maintain cognitive control. I suggest that the arguments for the claim that individuals are not liable for blame are invalid, and that there is some reason to suppose that individuals are, at least sometimes, liable to blame for the extent to which they are influenced in behavior and judgment by implicit biases. I also argue against the claim that it is counterproductive to see bias as something for which individuals are blameworthy. Rather, understanding implicit bias as something for which we are liable to blame could be constructive. Jules Holroyd, Journal of Social Philosophy.